All right, my friends, welcome into a special edition of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. This is episode 209, and my guest on the show today is Chad Ostrowski from the Teach Better team. Now, Chad and I had this conversation for a very specific reason. You see, recently Chad and I sat down and did a webinar as a joint venture between Road to Awesome and the Teach Better team, where our focus was on how do we help school leaders do the very best job possible with the strategic planning around their professional development for the upcoming year. After the webinar, which was extremely well received, Chad and I had a conversation and we thought, you know what, maybe we ought to recreate that, share that conversation as a part of a podcast. And so that's exactly what we've done. We sat down, we recorded an episode of the podcast, and this podcast will be released both on the Teach Better podcast as well as here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Folks, this is a fantastic conversation. Make sure you get ready to take some notes because there's so many great things that are here that Chad and I are talking about, the steps, the thoughts, the things that you want to do to make sure that one, your plan is built well. Number two, your plan is executed well. And number three, you have follow through on the other end of your plan to ensure that people have the success, that you see the growth, that you see that end product that you're hoping for down the road. Great conversation, lots of information, folks. I'll catch you on the other side. But now let's jump to this conversation with Chad Ostrowski. All right, friends, welcome into a special episode, a combined episode of the Teach Better podcast and the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Darrin Peppard here, Chad Ostrowski there. And we are going to talk about that strategic planning work that needs to be done and that you want to do and do well when it comes to professional development. So, Chad, man, I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Me too, man. The funny thing is we nerd out about this stuff together all the time, and you're one of my favorite people to talk about and talk with about these topics. So I'm really excited we get to capture it here on the podcast today.
Absolutely. And so, folks, for full disclosure, we did about a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, a joint webinar, Road to Awesome and Teach Better, together on this very topic. And number one, Chad, I thought it was such a great conversation. And you and I mean, seriously, like for never having presented or spoken together, the flow was really good. So to me, it just made some sense for us to jump on, recorded a joint episode of our podcasts and maybe just share more of everything there is to do with how you develop and crush and follow through on that professional development plan. So I'm fired up, man. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. And I think the timing is perfect when we're recording this episode here at the tail end of the year as people are thinking about their plans for next year. And this is an evergreen conversation, regardless of when you're having it, making sure you have clarity and purpose and a goal for what you're trying to achieve with development and moving the instructional needle forward. I'm excited to dig into all of those components and how administrators, schools, and districts can make their dreams a reality, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm curious. I run into this quite a bit, in the work that I do, working with, schools and leadership teams all over the country. Oftentimes, leaders will start the school year and they'll have this great idea of here's what we're going to do. And this is what the PD is going to look like. And before they know it, it's October. And then again, before they know it, it's February. And before they know it, it's this time of year. And they're looking back saying, yeah, I thought it was a good plan, but then the year happened. I would imagine you probably run into that every now and again as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a huge struggle going through the daily grind and keeping your mission and your goals for the year at the forefront. In fact, especially when administrators are putting planning together, a lot of times they get stuck in planning a day versus planning a movement or planning improvement. And when you're trying to fill that PD day, but not thinking about the full year and how you're going to support this idea, or you're not even providing that clarity in the first place, right? I think that's when things tend to fall apart. Because if you're planning a day, your teachers are still just experiencing a day, and then they're going back to whatever they were doing before. Hopefully, some things catch on, but you can't expect things to happen magically without purposeful planning and clarity throughout the whole year. Teachers also pick up on the lack of that clarity when it's not there for them. If they're just experiencing a single moment in time and then never hearing about something again, it's going to fall flat. It's not going to go anywhere. But if you start with a purposeful plan that's going to move your instruction from where you are to where you want to be, and then you have a strategic way to attack that plan, which is a lot of work that we do together, that's really how you can avoid that pitfall, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you're singing my song, saying clarity. You know how much that means to me. I mean, that's like the number one thing
I
I
know,
think for
man.
leaders is you got to get clear. And I talked about this on the webinar, but and I talk about this like every time I speak too. John Hattie in his work in visible learning talks about all of these different strategies that really move the needle in the classroom, and one of those that he really pointed to was teacher clarity, and teachers being really clear about not only what they expect, but how they're going to assess students, and the whole process, right? And to me, knowing that that's a 0.75 effect size, I think about that from a leader perspective, and I would love to know what the effect size would be if we actually studied leader clarity. Because, like you're saying, when leaders are super clear about what that plan is from the very beginning, and there's something you said in there I want to chase here in just a second, but the more as leaders you're clear from the beginning all the way through the process, the more likely that professional learning is to actually stick and become something meaningful and to actually lead to the transition that you're hoping for, which takes me to the thing I want to chase. I want to have you talk about this a little bit too. You had mentioned in there just that whole, teacher perspective and why that clarity is important for the teacher in terms of here's why we're doing this professional development. I think something that a lot of times leaders will overlook. And so, folks, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to take some notes on this podcast, here's where you start taking notes, right? Like right here. Make sure you're listening to your teachers. When you're picking up the phone and you're calling Chad and saying, hey, I want Teach Better to come in and do some work around rigor, or, we'd love to implement the grid method, or you're calling me and saying, hey, we want to work, we want you to bring culture first classrooms to our school. I would really hope, and I know Chad would too, that you've had some conversations with people about why you're doing that. It can't simply be, I mean, it could be, but it shouldn't be, that you think this is what we need. I made this mistake as a building administrator a couple of times. Hey, this is the professional development I want to bring to my staff. Well, one, do they have the capacity? Two, do they even have that need? And three, have you actually had that conversation with them?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Like how, from the very beginning, how do administrators
Yeah.
best gather the information they need to make a good decision to say this is what we need to move forward with from a professional learning perspective?
And this tends to be a huge amount of the conversations we have before any PD ever happens with a school or a district. And a lot of times we'll come in and do a strategic PD plan, and start with these conversations. And there's a couple things I often find myself saying. First of all, you are absolutely right. If teachers don't see the vision, the purpose, the clarity, or don't feel like they have a voice or a heads up about what is expected of them, they're going to ask me or you when you're running the PD, hey, do we actually have to do this? How much
Right.
or how little of this do we have to
Yeah.
do?
Oh,
Like, what is
the most
expected?
uncomfortable question for the presenter, by the way. So leaders,
Right.
don't set us up for that.
And so the simple phrase I tend to use when I'm talking about that aspect is focus on practices, not products. Now, I love the grid method, and I'm very near and dear to that framework. However, if any school that brings Teach Better in goes, everybody's doing grid method tomorrow without that reasoning behind it, like that's going to get a lot of pushback. However, if they say, listen, we are working towards more student-centered practices, progress monitoring, formative assessment practices, and we want to focus on mastery in classroom instruction, those are practices no one can argue about. So this is what I call creating a villain before you start. So if you put the name tag on whatever the thing is you're bringing in before you talk about the practices around the thing you're bringing in, you're going to create a villain because you've given a name to the thing for people to go, I don't like fill in the blank here. No teacher
Right.
or educator can say, I don't want to differentiate my instruction. I don't think I should formatively assess for mastery. I don't think I should be standards aligned. I don't think I should have positive classroom behavior interventions and management, right? But if they say grid method or culture first class, like whatever the thing is, like you are now creating a name of something before they know what the something is without a purpose behind it. And that's how you end up creating that kind of bad taste in everyone's mouth around the single idea that you haven't fully explained. But to your point, Darrin, if you start the conversation with, we really want to see these things in classrooms and we're bringing in this tool to help you achieve those goals, we really hope that you'll take something from this PD or X, Y, and Z from this PD so we can work towards our building or school goals. And that leads me to the first big question I always ask every administrator or team that I'm working with is, what do you want to see in every classroom every day? Or what should you or I be able to see in every classroom every day when I walk through your halls? If you can answer that question, you now have one, two, or three things that you can hang your hat on. Now, everything that falls after that can support those one, two, or three things. They can fall in one of those buckets. So now your staff knows what's expected. These three things need to be in every classroom every day. How are we doing that? You've been given PD A, B, and C that'll help you with those things. Now there's a purpose behind the training and development happening. So that's always how I start the conversation.
And I think what's so powerful there is getting to this is what I want to see. Not I want to see the grid method in every classroom. I want to see standards based instruction happening in my classrooms. When I was listening to you talk about that, it took me back to some time when I was a building administrator, and one of the many initiatives. I think I've told you this. At one point, we literally had 13 initiatives in the air all at the same time, and oh my gosh, wonderful, amazing assistant superintendent, curriculum and instruction person, but he wasn't very good at communicating what his vision was. And I think communicating that vision is critical. The villain, one of the many villains in our case, was Kagan Cooperative Strategies. If he had led with, I want to see high student engagement in every classroom, as you're describing, we wouldn't have had Kagan as the villain, right? But because it was led with, we're going to do Kagan Cooperative Strategies, it very quickly became something that teachers could say, I don't like that. I don't like that. None of them would have said, oh yeah, I don't think kids need to be engaged in my classroom. Come on. Right. But
Yeah.
instead, yeah, we followed the model that you're saying don't follow. And by the way, I love Kagan Cooperative Strategies. I think it's one of the very best professional developments I've ever been through. I have a handful of districts that use Kagan Cooperative Strategies. They're phenomenal. I'm not saying Kagan is a villain. I'm saying in our case, it's a very simple, here's a genuine example of what Chad is talking about.
And I think
And go ahead.
And I think you're hitting on a really good point. The thing that becomes a villain isn't usually a villain or a bad product or process or framework or training. It usually has nothing to do with the actual stuff inside of the training. You've just sent the message the wrong way, so it's not received the right way, right? Because once
Yeah.
again, you started
Yep.
with products before practice. If you start with
Right.
practices first, the product are just supporting the practices. So you don't have to worry about that whole
Yeah.
kerfuffle.
100%. 100%. Wow. And kerfuffle. Good word.
I
I
yeah.
think, yeah, well done. I think so much of this ties into, as the leader, how do you create that vision? How do you generate that compelling vision of here's where I see my school in 6 months. Here's where I see my
Yeah.
school in 9 months. Here's where I see my school in 2 years. I think so often we get caught up in the mission and vision conversation as it being this big mythical like thing that we have to do because, well, that's just what they said when they came and did our strategic planning. You have to have a mission and a vision. And those things are important. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But to me, as a leader, as somebody who works with leaders all over, I want that vision to be, where do you see your school? And you asked, question number one, what are the things that you want to see in every single classroom every single day? That's a question I love to ask leaders as well. And when you can answer that, that says, okay, I know what my vision is for this school. This is where I want to see my school. And so many leaders right now, Chad, and I'll guarantee we have people listening right now who are just getting ready to take on their first principalship.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some people who are probably in their first couple of years, and then there obviously
Yeah.
there are those veteran leaders who are always just looking to sharpen the saw a little bit. But for the early career leader, I'll say this: that vision that you're creating, start small. I used the imagery in our webinar of climbing Mount Everest, and how you wouldn't just show up at the base of Mount Everest and say, "Here we go," and we're going to climb this mountain. You have a lot of planning, a lot of steps along the way, and it's setting those interim goals, which I think will take us into maybe the next piece we want to talk about. But if you think about climbing Mount Everest, you're going to go from that initial stage, that first base camp where we're planning the hike, we're getting all of our supplies ready, we're planning this whole thing out. And the goal is, let's get to base camp number one, which is that first climb. And when we get that first climb done, there needs to be okay, let's adjust our course. Let's check in and see how everybody is doing. Let's celebrate the fact that we got to base camp one. And now let's figure out how do we go to base camp two. So our goal in this conversation is to talk about how you lay out that strategic plan for professional development. We've gotten to the vision. How do we get to base camp one? What's next?
Well, first of all, you have to have the map to get to base camp one that gets you to eventually the summit, right? If you don't have those clear outcomes, expectations, and entry points for staff, you're just guessing. You're just going, are you there yet? No.
Right.
Are you there yet? No. Are you there? And the answer is always going to be no, especially when you look at your whole building, because you're not breaking it down enough. So one of the things we will actually start this conversation with is our 360 strategic development tool. So we will actually, we've created 14 key areas, everything from unpacking standards, classroom management, mastery learning, assessment design, you name it. There's 14 key areas that we have found are high impact instructional areas. And we actually have schools go through these areas, and they will actually assess themselves on which of these areas have they already done, which of these areas are they currently working on, or which of these areas have they not even touched. And once you understand which of these key areas you're kind of focused on, you now have a starting point for the conversation. Because we need to continue to support things we're already doing. We don't want those to fall by the wayside. We need to dive deeper and really hammer in on the in progress or the conversations we're currently having. But we also need to assess, are there any of these these red areas, I like to call them, where we haven't even touched these things yet, but we really need to, because they're going to get us to that third base camp eventually, right? Like we need to start the conversation now. And so once we've gone through this plan, we actually have the conversation starter of, let's look at where you're currently at so we can take you where you need to go. Now we can look at what training and development do you need to take staff from where they are to where you want every staff member to get to? Are we creating multiple entry points? So then we will create tiers of professional development that each are identified with one of those key areas. So for example, maybe the first area is, can we just focus on unpacking the standards so we understand the rigor at which our instruction needs to be? Because if you don't know how to do that, everything tends to get wonky later on down the road instructionally. Maybe tier two is assessment, clear assessment to measure if students are meeting those standards that we unpacked. And maybe tier three is truly student-centered differentiation with mastery learning, or something like the grid method, or PBL, or fill in the blank with like your instructional vision here, where you want everybody to get to. Now, every single staff kind of has multiple people in these areas, but what you can do now is you've created a clear tiered plan where you can actually look at it and go, here's where I need everyone to get to, but here are multiple entry points for staff to start this work, so that we don't have just 10% of staff doing something, but the rest of the staff doing nothing because they're not working on this yet, right? Or they weren't ready for it yet. So this is how you slowly move that needle. And normally, and I know you know this, Darrin, like 3 to 5 years is normally how long it takes to impact a large scale change in most schools. So we're thinking long term here. But you do have to break it up. So that's the first step we normally take, is that assessment. And then what are those PD training tiers that you need to have with your staff to make sure you're hitting the mark?
Yeah, so let's stay on the tiers here for just a second, because what I am hearing you say, and what probably people are kind of processing right now, is, so you're kind of saying I have my teachers in different groups. I'm not just saying we're all doing this, right? Because after all, isn't that what we as administrators want our teachers doing in the classroom, meeting our kids where they are? So are you advocating for us to model what it is we want them to do in the first place? I know I'm being a little bit cheeky on this, but seriously, right? Like you're actually saying, I want you to maybe just go just a hair deeper with that. Maybe just one more shovelful of, we actually, yes, we are differentiating for our staff.
At 100%, right? Like we should be differentiating PD for teachers just like we want them to differentiate instruction. Because if you think about any staff you've ever worked with, or any leader that you've ever worked with that has a staff, we know that there are those rock star 10 to 15% staff members. There's that middle of the road, I'm going to do it because you told me to, but it'll be okay. And then there's like your holdouts, the ones you have to drag through every initiative ever, or ones that are just lacking the training and support to kind of get where they need to go. Every single staff I think I've ever worked with kind of has these three groups regardless. And I think it's pretty safe to say that that's most schools have kind of those kind
Oh
of
yeah.
aggregates. And every administrator that's listening to this right now, name your top 5 teachers. I guarantee you got 5 names in your head right now that are ready to run through the wall and do whatever you need
Yep.
in the best way possible. But if I also ask you, name the 5 teachers that are going to complain about this new initiative that you have in your head, you also can name those 5 every single time. So how do we challenge, how do we overcome kind of this thing? And the truth is, it's easy, differentiation. And so when you have the tiers, you can actually go through the process through those base camps with a clear individual goal for each of those tiers. So maybe in the first phase, right, you have 50% of your staff in tier 1, you have 25% of your staff in tier 2, and 25% of your staff at the goal you want everybody to be at. Now everyone's moving forward, but getting the work that they are ready for and that they need. Because you should also be assessing your current capacity to do the work you want to see. Some teachers are probably already ready to do that, so let them do that. You don't need to start them at step 1. Then as you go through and start evaluating to those next base camps, you can go base camp 1, we got everyone through their tiers. Now let's shift the tiers. Tier 1 moves to tier 2, tier 2 moves to tier 3, and we build leadership capacity in tier 3 with the pilot group we started in year 1. Same thing happens again at the end of that next base camp, where you can then go, hey, now everyone's in tier 3 where we want to see them. We're fostering additional leadership. And if we want, we can even start talking about the next cycle of planning, because now that initial group has got it. They're ready to go. So what's our next goal for instruction? Because here's another secret, Darrin, and I know you know this. Education's like being a shark. If you stop trying to improve, you're dead in the water. You should always be inching forward, right? You should always have
Yeah.
that next idea. And I'm not saying overwhelm people, but the minute we go, I think everything's okay. There's no school in this country that I've worked with that is okay on all fronts, that has no room for improvement, that has no, even the schools that have high performance, and I know you see this a lot, could probably have a better culture. Even scores that,
Oh yeah.
in some schools that have amazing culture, need help with some of the instructional performance
Hmm.
issues, right? Like kids
Right.
love being there and they're having a great time, but the academics aren't aligning to those goals. So like there's always those pieces and parts where you can bring in your resources or your trainers and your PD to support that work.
Yeah, what I love about that model and about how you guys at Teach Better drive professional learning is that, hey, next year I'm going to hire 7 new teachers. What do I do with them?
Yeah.
How do I get them going? And that was always a struggle for us, as a leadership team was, we would hire, when I was a high school principal, I had, 130 teachers on my staff or whatever I had. So every year, I mean, we had great culture. We didn't have real high turnover, but I still was probably going to hire 5, 6, 7 new teachers, because some would go on to administrative roles, some would retire, those kinds of things. You're still going to hire new people. And our struggle was, how do we catch them up? And typically the answer we got was, get them an instructional coach. Well, okay. But sometimes I had one year, 3 of my instructional coaches were new to the district. Like, okay, how do we catch them up?
Yeah.
If we're going to send them to 100 different, professional development things, they're not going to be here doing any coaching because we're just trying to simply catch them up. So what I love about tiering your staff is it allows you to really think about, okay, when this person comes on board, I don't have to put all 5 of my new teachers in tier one. I may have a teacher who comes in who, has a lot of skill and a lot of will, and I could put them right into tier two. I don't have to just simply say, here is our basic, let's catch them up process. So I really appreciate that a lot. I think there's just so much merit to thinking about tiering your teachers in terms of what do they really need in the classroom. And I'll say this too, by the way. You mentioned, you're going to have 5 who are going to push back. I had 5 like faces jump to the front of my
They're
mind.
always there.
My
Yeah.
5. And literally it was 5. I had 5 who pushed back on everything. And so administrators, I'm going to give you a tip. I'll share with you how I managed that. And what I see a lot of times, what I hear from a lot of administrators is those 5 or 7 or 2 or whatever you have, a lot of people will just avoid them. They'll just stay away from them. I don't want to engage with them. I would tell you, lean in to them. I mean, lean into them. And I don't mean go be a jerk to them. I mean, go lean into them. My 5, 2 married couples, by the way, a 4 of my 5, I just really leaned into their voice as often as possible. I was intentional to show up in their classrooms when they didn't have kids, when I was getting ready to make decisions, and I would just have conversation with them. And they weren't necessarily going to change my mind, and they had to learn that being heard didn't mean getting your way all the time. But
Right.
the more you can lean into those people, that's a big part of this whole process because they can sink this for you or they can help it continue to float and continue to thrive. And the
Yeah.
more that you lean into those people, have conversations with them, um, I probably spent more time with my 5 toughest than I did with anybody else. And they were all 5, by the way, phenomenal teachers. It was never a
Right.
question of skill. It was a question of will. And I think that's an interesting piece too that leaders need to be thinking about. You'll have some teachers who, man, the will be there. I mean, they'll be like, man, Chad, I'll run through a brick wall for you, but they may not have the skill. So you can't necessarily put them at tier 3 just because they're going to carry the flag for you. You've got to know the combination of skill and will in order to really get them put in the right place.
Yeah, and tying the outcomes in each tier to those 3 to 5 things you want to see in every classroom also allows you to approach those conversations you're talking about and use that plan as a third party in the conversation. So then you can go, hey, we're going to bring this in because it's focused on this. How do you currently do that in your classroom? So a lot of times, the thing those 5 teachers, they're usually like really high performing teachers that go, I'm good. I don't need this extra thing. And if it can never be, if you don't do this, it's wrong. And if you do this, it's right. Because now you once again have created the villain all over. It has to be, are you doing this practice? If you are, conversation's done. We're good. And if you're doing the practice, the tool and the resource you use to implement the practice becomes irrelevant. So now you have the power as the administrator to go, hey, I know you know that we've talked about our 3 look fors and classroom goals. As long as you're doing these things, right? Whether you're doing the grid method or stations and centers, and you know, like is irrelevant as long as you're differentiating and personalizing learning for individual student growth, for an example, right? And so there's a lot of power in respecting those 5 in their opinions, because sometimes it's because they already think they're doing the thing you want to see. And that's where I think the clarity, and I'm going to throw you this bone because I know you have like 4 billion things to talk about after the statement I'm about to make. And the truth is, no matter how good your tiered PD plan is, if you don't have clarity and good leadership after the plan starts, it's going to fall apart, right?
Yeah. Yeah, boy, yeah, you just floated that one right over the plate to me. I was already like getting ready to jump in on that anyway, so that's perfect. Yes, absolutely. As the leader and the leadership team, you've got to have a really clear plan of how you're going to support this throughout the course of the coming year. It's one thing to say, okay, our plan is we're going to bring Teach Better in, we're going to do the grid method, and we've got these 3 tiers and all that kind of stuff, and then when the school year starts, we're just going to keep running around putting out fires as administrators. If that's your plan will fail. Because as Chad was just saying, even if your 5 are doing the things you want them to do, whether they're using, the particular method that you brought in or not, how do you know? And for that matter, how do they know? So
Right.
you've got to make sure you have a plan for, you use the word look fors. Perfect, right? These are our look fors when we're in classrooms. But if you don't have a plan for when you're going to be in classrooms and how you're going to provide feedback, how you're going to collect data, all of those types of things, the plan's going to fall apart. Who's going to provide support? How are you going to array your team so that you're getting regular check-ins in the classroom? Typically, I'll use the word walkthroughs for that, but there's so many different things you can call them. A couple of districts I work with call them learning walks. Whatever it might be, you have to have a plan. I had a leadership team of 4 when I was a high school principal, and we divided the building in 4 sections. And the idea was we were going to rotate every month. So in September, I had the 4th floor, for example. And that's going to be, I'm going to get into every single classroom at least once during that month. Now, ideally, you're in a little bit more than that, but, hey, take as many as you can. But you have to decide and build it into your plan. This is how frequent we're going to be in classrooms. This is the feedback that we're going to try to provide. This is what we're going to look for. This is how we're going to coach that, whether that's you as the administrator or if you have an instructional coach on your staff or whatever. You've got to have all of these different pieces laid out and decided in your plan. Also, you should have, here's how we're going to celebrate it. That make sure that's in your plan too, because when you are celebrating things, when you're reinforcing the things you want to see, that's when you start to see more and more and more of that. So building that plan to me really comes down to all of those different pieces. And then this is something else I'll add. The primary leader on the campus, if you are the building principal, lay out these expectations from the very beginning with your team and hold your team accountable. That is a part of your role in this process. Don't just say, hey, Chad, I expect you to do, 2 walkthroughs of every classroom this month in your section, and Jeff's going to do his, and Scott's going to do his, and blah, blah, blah. And then I never check on you. Because oftentimes what happens, especially with assistant principals, here's what I'm supposed to do, but I'm busy with discipline. I'm busy with this. I'm busy with this. I'm busy with this. Yeah. So you've got to be really clear with that expectation, and then you have to reinforce that expectation. In some cases, and you know what, you can tier your administrative team if you need to.
Sure.
You may have a couple on your administrative team who, you know what, I tell them they're going to go do these walkthroughs. They're going to go and they're going to crush it. And they're going to give great feedback and they're going to collect wonderful data. There's one on my team who's maybe brand new. I need to go with that person. I need to spend time with that person and support that person. But those things I think are so critical. And those are the things that get overlooked because, like I said, when we kick this off, administrators will be like, holy cow, it's March, man. I haven't been in a classroom in 2 months.
Right.
No, I get
Yeah.
it, but no.
And that's a fantastic point because you can give the directive, but if you're never talking about it after that, it's not going to happen. And the truth is like, um, those we serve will value what we continue to value ourselves. If you don't value it enough to have continued meetings, touch points, collecting the data, like what we usually do from an instructional standpoint is I'll work with districts to help facilitate this, and we'll create a walkthrough like Google form so that anytime a walkthrough happens, the form gets filled out. It's super simple, easy, clean, and then it gets fed into a spreadsheet. And then you can actually go, what percentage of our staff are doing what we want? Like if you align the Google sheet to the observation form to the outcomes you want to see or the look fors, you can literally evaluate a grade level, a building, an individual, and you can filter
Right.
all that data. Now you have a monthly meeting where you're reviewing that from your observations and going, how are we doing as a building? Is our data getting better or worse? And just that little bit of like, hey, we're going to collect this and we're going to talk about it on this date at this time, and that's a non-negotiable, like that alone can be enough for the work to happen. But I'm hearing a bunch of administrators listening right now going, Darrin, that sounds amazing, but I got a lot of stuff going on in my building. Like a kid over here was vaping in the bathroom, and there was a fight in room 214, and I gotta get the fundraiser email out, and there's a PTO meeting later today. Like, as an administrator, I love the idea, right? About the idea of like, let's make time to go in the classrooms, but like, where's that time coming from? Is my question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's be honest. Administrators face a lot of time bandits, right? There are so many things that can steal your time and pull you in a million different directions.
Right.
You've seen me do this live with
I
a
know.
group, hey folks, on the count of three, just shout out your biggest time bandits. And it's always things like, discipline or emails or meetings or the things that administrators did not go into administration to do, right? Those are the things that are going to suck away your time. But the truth is, I know you want to be in classrooms, and it's easy to say, yeah, that sounds good, but I think there's two pieces. One, you already touched on, and that is if I continue to value this, if it's important to me, I'm going to find a way to make sure that priority happens. The second thing is you just simply have to be intentional about your use of time, and you've got to be
Yes.
intentional about putting your priorities on the calendar in advance. Leverage your admin assistant or whatever to help you stay on task. So like for me, every single Sunday when I was a school administrator, I built my calendar for the coming week. And I started by putting my priorities right onto the calendar. If I knew I had to do 10 walkthroughs that particular week, I'm going to get them on the calendar now. If I
Yeah.
knew that I had a big report that I had to get sent over to the district office, I'm going to block that time on my calendar. If I was always real big on really being focused on, school culture. And so I would actually put time blocks on my calendar for school culture. Even if I didn't know what I wanted to do yet, it was, I'm going to put school culture
Yeah.
15 minutes here, 22 minutes here. I'm going to, make sure you block those things on your calendar, because if you allow others to dictate how your time is used, it will not get used the way you want it to.
100%.
And yeah, and the third thing I guess I would say on this too is sometimes you just got to get up on the balcony. I talked about this, wrote about this in Road to Awesome, The Journey of a Leader. I call it balcony level leadership. You got to get up out of the fray and take a look and check in on your priorities. For me as a school leader, I had 6 priorities, 6 things that, like, to me, these are going to really move the needle. I would literally go stand on the balcony above our gymnasium, and in my mind's eye, I'm putting my 6 things down on the floor. I was a basketball coach. I mean, that's kind of where this comes from.
Sure.
But I needed to, like, literally go stand on the balcony and say, okay, I say that, being the instructional leader is one of my 6, which it was. How am I doing on that? am I really putting the time in that I need to put into it? I think you have to have that reflection time to hold yourself accountable. And I mentioned your admin assistant, but man, my admin assistant, she knew my priorities. She knew exactly what had to happen. I also gave her full access of, my email calendar, all that kind of stuff. So she would make sure my priorities were on the calendar. And if I got lost, I would find every now and again, I would find balcony on on my calendar, and it was Marilyn putting it on there like, hey buddy, get over on the balcony, you're like not focusing right now, I need you to get refocused. So I think it's really important that you are super intentional with your time and make sure that you are setting that aside, and make sure also that you're clear that those things will come first. That the only things that will keep me from doing these high leverage items on my calendar are, number one, the superintendent calls. Number two, the building is actually on fire. Not like the fires we're always putting out, but it's like literally the building is on fire. Otherwise, don't allow yourself to be interrupted. I'll tell a quick story. And this is an extreme. I wouldn't recommend this one, but I got away with it. I did a no office day quite frequently, where I would go out and either shadow a student, or I would just be in classrooms the entire day. And my day was blocked. And I had a parent show up insisting to see me. I had 3 assistant principals. He could have seen one of those 3. But nope. I insist. I'm going to see Mr. Peppard. And my secretary said, he's not available. And he said, I know he's in the building. She said, I didn't say he wasn't in the building. I said he's not available.
Right.
And I'm going to sit here and wait until he does. Okay. 2:45, I came back upstairs, and there he's sitting. By the way, he was angry about a grade that his daughter got. He hadn't even talked to the teacher yet. He didn't need to see me, I mean, so be it. But my secretary did such an amazing job. She was like, no, you can call the superintendent if you want, but his priorities today are to be in classrooms. If you'd like, I'll schedule a meeting with you tomorrow. He would even come. This guy was a dentist in town. He's like, Darrin would even come to your office to meet with you if you want tomorrow, but he can't do it today. And yeah, the guy was pretty livid, but ultimately these are my priorities. By the way, I didn't do that my first year as a building principal. I think I was about, I don't know, year 3 or 4.
Sure,
So
sure.
I was a little more
first,
bulletproof,
right?
yeah, than I was in year 1. But I just think it's that important to say, look, this is what it's about.
So let's take that example, though, in a less extreme example or aspect of that. Let's say you don't want to go full force. What you could do is you just have the protocol for that gatekeeper, whoever it is, to ask these questions. Have you contacted the teacher? I'm very sorry if you haven't already discussed it with the teacher. It's not appropriate for you to talk to Mr. Peppard yet, because that's the chain of command in these conversations. And the first thing he's going to ask you is, did you talk to the teacher? And then as long as you stick to those guns and those guidelines of like, hey, if you haven't talked to the teacher about this grade, there's nothing I can do, because I don't have all the context, and I need you both to have this conversation first. But that also respects the professional autonomy of your educators and your team to go, if you haven't, I'm not going to let you just skip, hop, and jump over the head of my staff because you want to try to get something done, and so I think the story is extreme, but I think the point is really valid in terms of protecting those things. And I think you're absolutely right. And the same thing goes with PD, with instructional initiatives, with culture building, with building focuses and priorities. All of those things will die immediately if they get if they get outside of your blinders, right? So because
Absolutely.
the truth is, there's always going to be something else to do. There literally is always something else to do, whether you're a teacher, administrator, leader, district, school, whatever. There's going to be something trying to fight for that space in your vision. So you are the only one stopping things from entering or leaving that scope. And so I love the focus on taking that responsibility on yourself and making it a focus. And I'm sure you're going to have good weeks and bad weeks and better weeks and worse weeks at it. But as long as it's in there most of the time, you're going to be moving things forward.
Right. And I think also, in order for the lasting change to genuinely stick, to be independent of you as the building leader. As we're recording this, the high school where I was a principal, they're wrapping up, last day for students actually, or for seniors, was yesterday. I know this because a handful of my friends have seniors and I'm seeing all their pictures on Facebook. And what I'm seeing in a lot of the photos and some of the things that they're doing are things that we created while I was there, but those systems have endured
Love that.
long after I'm gone. And that's what you want from your professional development. If you're saying these are the things I want to see in classrooms, those are things that should endure, whether you take another position, you retire, go be a superintendent like I did. So that's something we should be thinking about in our plan as well. How do we build systems for this rather than it being just dependent on Darrin, just on Chad, or for that matter, it shouldn't be dependent on Chad as the trainer who comes in and provides this support, or Darrin as the trainer who comes in and provides support. What are some thoughts you have around that? I mean, we're going all over the place, but we're still talking about, like, how do you build this plan, right? So, what are your thoughts there?
I think you'll agree with this statement, and if you don't, just let me know. But if we do our jobs well from a strategic standpoint, eventually we won't be needed because they will have the internal capacity to accomplish their goals on their own, right? So for me, it's about building the capacity internally to carry the water when the vendor or the trainer or the PD leaves. And one of the things I often start these conversations with is, this has to be your school's work, your district's work. It can't be Road to Awesome's work coming in or Teach Better works coming in. It might start that way, right? But it has to become something you internalize, or it won't last longer than I keep coming. And so it's one of those pieces and parts where we have to create internal capacity, leadership, and strategic plans to carry the work forward, regardless of who is coming into our ecosystem, because the ecosystem has to be able to maintain those systems on their own. And to your point, it's exactly what you just saw. The systems were strong enough to survive you leaving so that they stayed there. And oftentimes, I think it's the little things that you've already discussed. I often say, when we do the things we don't want to, when we don't have to, is where progress lives. So there are so many things that we don't have to do today because, I can do it tomorrow. I don't need to do it because if I don't, no one will know, and no one will send me an email.
Right.
So when we do the things we don't have to do, when we don't want to do them because they're that little bit of extra time or work or effort, that to me is when you put it on that calendar, even though you don't want to do it that day, you're going to commit to doing it, even though you don't have to, you don't want to. Doing that 1,000 times in a year will get you to your goal, because you're never going to be perfect and want to do those things all the time. But doing those things consistently is where growth lives, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that's pretty stellar. So I think something, as we kind of wind down here, I think something else that people should be thinking about, as you're, saying, hey, maybe I want to work with Road to Awesome, maybe I want to work with Teach Better or whomever it might be. Again, I think getting back to what is it that you're really looking for in every classroom, what are the systems you want to develop? And then, as a leadership team, how are you going to support and reinforce and coach and analyze the work that's being done is super critical. So I think something that maybe we can talk about just really quick is that Road to Awesome and Teach Better, actually, you can work with both of us together.
Absolutely, yeah.
This was kind of a fun idea that kind of came. Didn't really come out of nowhere, but certainly a conversation you and Jeff and I have had about supporting both sides of this, right?
Yeah.
You've talked about some amazing things working directly with the teachers, but I know sometimes you run into the administrators need some support.
Absolutely.
And that's where I come in.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we've actually put together collaborative packages so that instead of having to bring in two vendors, you can just have one single kind of contract and take care of all your needs kind of at once. And I think honestly, this collaboration, I'm really excited about it because I think it fills gaps on both ends of the services we tend to provide, schools and districts. So even when I'm providing amazing PD here from the Teach Better side of things, it can still fall apart if that leadership isn't there to drive the message. The same thing on the other side, right? If you're trying to lead leadership change and planning and strategic vision and clarity, but the work isn't getting done or the training subpar. So
Right.
I'm super excited because I think it's a great fit and I think it's a way to approach any goal from both ends of the spectrum. And I'm even like confident enough to say that I think both of us together um, can help make any leader's vision a reality given the right time and support, especially when we're working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to have the opportunity to work alongside you and the Teach Better team.
Same.
I think some really cool stuff. So folks, shameless plug here. Reach out to both of us. We'll put in the show notes contact information for both Teach Better and Road to Awesome. So whether you're listening to this on the Teach Better podcast platform or you're listening to this on Leaning into Leadership, either way, you're able to get in touch with me, with Chad. Man, I appreciate this conversation, Chad. I really hope leaders took away some actionable steps, some things to really think about as they're putting this plan together going into next year so they can actually find some success.
It's been amazing. Appreciate you, friend.
All right. As I told you, this is an absolutely loaded conversation. I hope that you came away with a lot of great thoughts, a lot of great ideas. If you're feeling like, man, I need more, reach out to me, Darrin at roadtoawesome.net, or reach out to Chad at teachbetter.com. Together, we will help you make sure that you absolutely crush your plan. And if it's appropriate, Chad, myself, or both of us will help you to actually implement your plan. That's what I've got for you here, folks, on this very special midweek episode of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. I will see you again very soon for episode 210, which will drop this coming Sunday. Get out there, have a Road to Awesome week.